Um, all right. They keep changing Zoom, so I just want to make sure that it says I hit record and it looks like it is. Yes, okay. My little signal says we're recording. So good morning. Today is Thursday, September 4th, 2025. I'm Rabbi Jonathan Blake of Westchester Reformed Temple in Scarsdale, New York. Our learning for this month of Elul, which is the Hebrew month that leads immediately up to the celebration of the New Year and, of course, the Day of Atonement, the Days of Awe, will be focused on Maimonides Hilchot Teshuva, the laws of repentance from his magnum opus of Jewish law, Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah was written as a kind of common Jew's guide to all matters of Jewish law and practice. So it is the first, and in many ways, still the greatest of the legal codes of Judaism, post-Talmudic by several centuries. If the Babylonian Talmud was completed somewhere, let's call it around the year 800, though of course no such exact year is verifiable. It would be hundreds of years before Maimonides, writing in the 1200s, would produce this work. Nevertheless, it is his effort to streamline the vast corpus of rabbinic thought, Jewish legal thought, into a simple, streamlined code. The name Mishnah Torah meaning a second Torah. It is classic Maimonides to offer such a chutzpahdik title to his work to say, well, if you only needed two books in your Jewish library, they would be these: have a Torah and a Mishneh Torah. The word Mishneh Torah is actually taken from the book of Deuteronomy, from the Parsha that we were reading just a couple last week, Shoftim, which advises that even the king is bound by the law. So the king, meaning the Jewish monarch, not the many potentates of various non-Jewish empires under which we lived as second-class citizens for much of the last 2,000 years, but rather the Jewish monarch who is part of our classical history and whose presence is not just predicted by the Torah, but recorded by the Torah, even in a pre-monarchic period of Jewish history. So we were a monarchic community, a monarchic civilization for, I don't know, 500, 400 years, from the periods of the united monarchy of Saul, David, and Solomon, followed by the divided monarchy with a kingdom in the north called Israel, kingdom in the south called Judah, and the various kings of Israel, whose names I would not expect any of us to know, and which I certainly cannot recount, at least not chronologically. Maimonides, playing off of what the Torah says about the king of Israel, calls his book Mishneh Torah, playing on the Torah's own instruction to say even the king must keep a Mishneh Torah, literally a copy of the Torah, by the side of his throne and read in it or from it every single day. It was a way of saying, well, even the king is not above the law. Would that such words would be heard all over the globe today. Um, and Maimonides uses that phrase, Mishneh Torah, to apply to this great writing project, one of two of his greatest writing projects in his long and diverse career. The other being Moreh Nevuchim, A Guide to the Perplexed, which is a work of Aristotelian-derived philosophy, a very different kind of work. Moreh Nevuchim is for his elite students of philosophy. Mishneh Torah, the subject of our study, is for anyone, any Jewish person who wants to understand just how and why we practice Judaism the way we do. And much of what he has to offer is actually, even to this day, 800 some years later, the cornerstone of Jewish practice. If you want to know, for instance, how does Judaism think about war? The source on that is, of course, from Torah and Tanakh and Talmud, but the distillation and I think, fair starting point for that inquiry is Mishneh Torah, Maimonides' Hilchot Milchamot HaMalachim, I think, the laws of the wars of kings. And he talks about, well, what is a justified war? What is a permitted war? What is a mandatory or commanded war? We actually studied this a couple years ago in our Gemara, our Talmud study. So on to Mishneh Torah, and in order to launch into a text, we pronounce this blessing: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. With thanks to the Creator of all, we immerse ourselves in words of Torah. I'm going to bring up onto the screen the following tab. Don't be scared; it's all Hebrew, but don't worry. Maimonides Hebrew is actually some of the most user-friendly classical Hebrew text you can study. And I'm going to go and, as we do, translate as we go. It's not false advertising when we put in the temple bulletin and newsletter that you don't need any Hebrew to study with me. I try to hold to that. But I think that without any reference to the Hebrew, well, what was it? I can't remember who said this. Somebody will probably remember it better than I, but it is said that reading in translation is like kissing a bride through the veil. Right, so we want it's uh, it removes both the intimacy of the encounter and even does violence to the meaning of the text, in that there is no way to render in another language all of the nuances that are conveyed by an author in the original. We'll do our best to go both ways. Using this incredible tool, Sefaria, which is the website up here, sefaria.org, which is a library, open source. Like you don't have to pay a membership fee, though they do rely on donations. And the Rabbi's Discretionary Fund of Westchester Reformed Temple is a proud supporter of Sefaria because this tool is instrumental to everything we do at WRT these days. I don't think we've had a sermon or adult ed that has not benefited from this incredible source and this website, which is constantly growing. Each year, they announce kind of a list of the new texts in translation. So the one I'm most excited for is a new translation of the Zohar, which is going to be available on Sefaria. We're looking, as you can see here, at Mishneh Torah, Repentance 2, Laws of Repentance, teshuvah, translated by one Eliyahu Toger or Touge of Moznaim Publishing. Moznaim is the Hebrew word for tablets, actually. And you can see that his translation is here, but I'm going to give my translation and we'll kind of do side by side or comparison. You can even reformat these things if it is helpful to you when I click this guy here, the little capital A, that's your language tool. So you can read it with the translation up down. The layout you can see I have as one paragraph of Hebrew, one paragraph of English. But if I click this little fella here, it actually puts them side by side, which is a nice way to read. Or you can do it inverted like that. Maybe we'll keep it like that for now. Um, and you can change the font size for those like me who now wear progressives. It's very helpful. Or you can read it just in English or just in Hebrew. Just a couple of, well, now that I've done that, how do I go back? Great, Blake. Classic of me. All right, let's do source with translation. And we're looking at chapter 2, and we're picking up right where we left off. So our next paragraph is uh, Mishnah Torah, chapter 2, verse 9 of the laws of repentance. Let's look together. Actually, I feel like the English is a bit of a spoiler, but let's see how we do with it side by side. Okay, Ein ha-teshuvah velo yom ha-kippurim michaprim. Okay, so let's just start with that. Ein is a part of speech in Hebrew that frames in the negative. So it's kind of uh, parallel with the familiar word for no or not, which is lo. Ein ha-teshuvah velo yom ha-kippurim. So probably the way I would translate this is teshuvah, which is the Hebrew word for repentance, coming from the root shuv, to turn or return. So teshuvah, repentance, and the Day of Atonement do not atone. Lo hayom yom kippurim, the Day of Atonement, lo mechaprin. Mechaprin is the verb form of to kippur something. So there's a lot going on just in these first 5 words or 6 words of the passage we're looking at. So I'd like to break it down a little bit more. Teshuvah and the Day of Atonement do not make atonement. And we're going to get to another conjunction word here, ela, which means except, sorry. Um, but let's just break this down a little bit. Teshuvah, we've said, is the spiritual process of turning and returning that we are commanded to do. And this time of year, which is why this is our Elul study, but also this is a spiritual developmental process that we embrace and to which we turn and return throughout our lives. So the process of teshuvah is not seasonally bound. It is a mitzvah that is incumbent upon us at all times. I really believe that the best way of understanding teshuvah is not atonement or repentance, but rather evolution. It's about how we grow as human beings, as people growing in moral character, in spiritual development. Um, and the process of teshuvah, which Maimonides has been unpacking for us in this text, will be further elaborated. And in this text, we're going to learn about, well, the limits of teshuvah. So the first piece we're looking at is teshuvah itself, this spiritual process, which involves components of approaching people whom we may have hurt, relationships in which we have a responsibility. We may have injured the relationship, and we therefore, it is incumbent on us to repair. So, although the word repair is not in this phrase, that is part of teshuvah and the Day of Atonement itself. So, Yom HaKippurim, usually written in the plural, is the full name of the Day of Atonement, literally the Day of Atonements. A Kippur is an atonement. Sorry, it keeps doing that every time I highlight, which I don't like about the way Safari interacts with your cursor. Um, and you can see the word here, Kippur, which is the root of Yom HaKippurim. Specifically, the root is actually the kaf, the pei, and the resh, kaper. And then it comes up in verb form here, michaprin. Michaprin, which means to do atonement or to do kippur. Kippur is a really interesting word. The root for kaf pei resh, kapar, or kaper, means literally to cover over. So a kapara is a covering over of things, and in fact can even be a word for a curtain. And if you invert the letters, a kaporet, which is a covering, becomes a parochet, which is a curtain. So if you flip the letters around so that it's pei resh kaf, parochet is actually the name for the curtain in the Torah. It's fabric that's divides from one zone of holiness to the next in the ancient tabernacle, and is the name for the apparatus in the synagogue that visibly closes off the Torah scrolls from the eyes of the worshipers in the congregation. So when I approach at WRT to reveal the Torah scrolls in the ark, I take a little curtain rod and I pull it back from left to right. That curtain is called a parochet. Now you know something next time you're in synagogue. Oh, the rabbi opened the parochet. WRT actually has a little bit of a halachic problem with its parochet in that it is not opaque. Most Orthodox synagogues, the parochet, whether it is an actual curtain or a door or some other apparatus, has to be opaque because if you are seeing a Torah scroll, you're supposed to stand. And it's not nice to make the whole congregation stand all the time. So, fun fact, when WRT hosts a non-worship joint program that may include Orthodox Jews from the community, a special lecture, a music series, something like that in our sanctuary, and sometimes even like a big community funeral, we will sometimes pull an opaque screen down, a second parochet, which exists inside of our ark. Some of you may have seen this if you come to like a UJA program that's held in the sanctuary. We actually bring down a fully opaque white screen in front of the parochet, a second parochet, so that nobody who's sitting in the sanctuary can actually see the Torah scrolls. With all this, the key thing to take away is that these letters, these three letters, all derive from the same root, which means to cover over. Which may surprise you that, the root of atonement in the biblical Hebraic root sense is not, for instance, purging or cleansing or eliminating whatever you're trying to purge, cleanse, or eliminate when you make teshuvah, but rather you cover over it. I've wondered about this a lot, just kind of in the, relating to it, not just as a language nerd, but as a Jew and a person who tries to take seriously the tradition and incorporate it in a modern way into my Jewish practice and in what I share with the community. And I think that, there might be a psychological acknowledgement that when we have things that we've done that we regret. Regret is often the prompting emotion that leads us to teshuvah. So it's actually, I think, evolutionarily in terms of our spiritual development, a very useful feeling. Psychopaths are not capable of regret. That's what makes them psychopaths. But most people are capable of feeling regret, and that becomes the goad, if not the guide, to making teshuvah. Um, but even with that, you can't change what you've done in the past, right? So you can only kind of like cover it over in order to move forward. In a sense, it's still there. Even years and years and years later, it gets integrated into you, as well as the harms that are done to us by others. And that may be why teshuvah is so hard, because you can never really fully purge or cleanse. You can do a kapara. You can paper over it. Paper over it colloquially means something that I think teshuvah does not mean, but you can cover over it, but you can't eliminate it. So I don't know. These are just possible ways that we could relate to this complex constellation of just a very few words. Let's read the rest of the sentence before we take questions and comments. Okay. So again, we're beginning with this grammatical, this syntax in the negative. So ein ha-teshuvah v'lo yom ha-kippurim. So the process of teshuvah and the Day of Atonement do not mechaprin. They do not make atonement or cover over. Ella, except. All right, so that's a key conjunctive word. Ella, except al averot, this word averot here, sheben adam la makom. All right, except in the case of averot are transgressions from the Hebrew word avar, which means to go over or to cross over or to transgress, right? Which implies motion over something. So you went over the line, you crossed a boundary. Sins, transgressions. All right, but this is a specific word for transgression, so I think the word transgression is probably the best we have in English. Al averot sheben adam lamakom, literally that are between a person and the omnipresent one. Lamakom, makom literally means place, but in this context, it is a reference, one of the many epithets that are used for God. So now taking the full sentence here, and you can say Teshuvah and Yom Kippur only atone. I actually kept the negative framing in the translation, even though it's a little clunkier. And I said Teshuvah and the Day of Atonement do not make atonement except for transgressions between a person and God. So if you weren't to read any further, what we have thus far is a strict limiting condition placed upon teshuvah, the process of making atonement, and the Day of Atonement itself. That they are only efficacious, they only have efficacy, they only work with respect to the transgressions that exist between a person and God. So, what does that mean? Like, what would be examples of transgressions between a person and God, as compared, in case you're wondering, to transgressions between one person and another? Somebody give me an example of what you think might reside in the category of transgressions against God or between it doesn't even say against God, between a person and God.
You're breaking the Shabbos.
Okay, great example, right? I mean, breaking Shabbos does not generally involve hurting another person. Like, no harm is done to anyone else. That is, your observance of Shabbat is a matter between you and God, right? And so too with many other rules that pertain in Jewish life, anything ritual, anything in the domain of ritual, like, oh, I didn't light Shabbos candles. Well, I mean, that obviously is a problem vis-a-vis the observance of the tradition, but the only one, as it were, affected is God, right? It doesn't, I mean, yeah, I mean, you could say, well, by not observing Shabbos, you're setting a bad example for your family, your community. Okay, but that's secondary. The idea is that Shabbat is a covenant between God and the people, and therefore violating Shabbat or failure to attend a Shabbat, that's between you and God. Other examples, mom and dad.
Well, Maimonides is giving you two examples here that don't seem to be at all equal. He's giving you an example of eating something, that's not kosher. So okay, I ate an oyster the other night, but unpermitted sexual relations, how can that only be between a person and God, as if
Great,
there's no other person involved?
great. Let's go there then. I can see that you read ahead, so that's good. All right, let's see. Well, what does Maimonides consider? All right, so for example, Sheben Adam Lamakom. Kugon just means for example, Misha Chal Davar Asur, a person who ate a thing that is forbidden. Okay? O Bal Be'ila, literally one who engages in intercourse. Asura, that was forbidden. V'chayotze bahen, and anything that follows from those, so any category of transgression that is derived from or that flows from a kind of a domino effect. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good question. I'm now trying to imagine for myself what kind of forbidden sexual relations would be between a person and God. Obviously, incest is not a victimless crime. Sex with a minor is actually not officially restricted in Leviticus, but that's not a victimless crime. On the other hand, yeah, adultery, not a victimless crime. And yet, I'm wondering, like, there are a number of restricted sexual relations that might not be problematic on the human sphere in that they are fully consensual, but the Torah still outlaws them. Um,
What's the deal with masturbation?
right, masturbation would be one that is considered a crime and against God, not against man or humankind. And that's a rabbinic law, though it is derived from the story of Onan, who's a minor biblical figure who dies only 3 verses after we learn about his existence, for the crime of spilling his seed on the ground when he was in fact instructed to procreate with his levirate bride. That's a long story, but check out Genesis chapter 37 if you want to go down that rabbit hole. And from Onan, we have the archaic term for masturbation, onanism. Don't, if you really want to insult somebody, just call him an onanist and see what they say. Probably won't say much of anything these days. Um, Bestiality? I mean, that's a sexual transgression for sure.
I
Oh,
mean, the larger point that I wanted to point out is that these are two things that are you would think would be the same, but it's really hard to put them in the same category at all.
yeah, though it's interesting. I'm trying to think, well, what links eating forbidden food and forbidden sexual relations? The word that's used in the Torah is toeva, which is a Hebrew word that is usually translated as an abomination. That it is something that the word I would use, it is a religious taboo. It is not necessarily an ethical violation. It's a religious violation. It's something that violates the sensibilities of the Jewish tradition in the classical sense. Probably the best example about the forbidden sexual relation actually would be male homosexual sex. I mean, this is pre-AIDS, so let's just assume that Maimonides, who was a physician, is not actually thinking about the medical aspect or the medical risk of homosexual sex. I don't think that was a thing, and homosexual sex was well known throughout the ancient world and it enshrined in Greek art and literature. So there's certainly a familiarity with the practice as old as humankind itself. That's probably one example where it's considered a crime against God, not against man. Like that, there's no harm that's being done to another person when you have sex with a person of the same sex. The issue, as Judaism regards it, at least as framed by Maimonides, is that it violates a religious precept and becomes an abomination in the eyes of God. I think that's no different, actually, than eating shrimp. Which, by the way, if you were to make contemporary arguments of why the the degrees to which strict interpretations of Judaism and of course Christianity get all bent out of shape about homosexual activity. There's a lot of bedroom policing in evangelical Christianity, in Orthodox Judaism, in strict Islam, in many world traditions. Um, One counter argument from a Jewish standpoint is that, yeah, the Torah does prohibit homosexual activity, but it also uses the same word to describe it as it does for eating shrimp. Right. So if you want to talk about that oyster you had, it resides in the same category in that it's an Aveira, a transgression between a person and God, not of one person against another.
That
So
makes sense.
yeah,
That makes
okay. That's how I appreciate the opportunity to kind of think through it a little bit more deeply. Um, all right. And then now let's see, of course, the parallel clause here, which is the next sentence. Aval, which is the Hebrew word for but, averot sheben adam lachavero, so transgressions, averot, sheben, that are between, adam, a person, lachavero, chaver, being his friend or his another person, such as kigon hachovel et chavero, a person who hurts his colleague, his friend, his partner, is another person. O ha-mekalel chavero, who curses that person, who insults him, who causes him embarrassment. O gozalo, or who steals from him. Gozal is to be a thief. A gozel is a thief. So gozalo, who steals from him. V'chayotze bahen, and anything that kind of, that's an etc. Anything like that. Eino nimcha lo leolam. Okay, so no forgiveness attends to him ever, leolam, ever, ad sheyitain lachavero, until he gives his fellow mashehu chayav lo, what he is obligated to, v'iratzehu, and appeases him. So again, the full block is sins between a person and another person. This translator says man and man, but it's clearly intended to be incumbent on men and women. This is in the category of negative mitzvot. Like if you were quick review here. Of the 613 mitzvot that Judaism outlines and that Maimonides exhaustively catalogs, there are positive mitzvot and negative mitzvot. A positive mitzvah is a thou shalt. A negative mitzvah is a thou shalt not. All of the negative mitzvot are incumbent on men and women equally, right? Women who get out of many Jewish mitzvah obligations do not get out of the negative mitzvot. Thou shalt not murder is not incumbent only on men. Like that's all of us. However, all but three of the positive mitzvot are incumbent only on men. The three that are incumbent on women are light the Shabbat candles, take the challah offering out of the dough while baking it, and set up the eruv for Shabbat. They're all Shabbat related, and they're all domestic, and they're all things that the woman in the household is actually not just is a nice thing to do, but is a mitzvah, a religious commandment, religious obligation to do. Those are the only three positive mitzvot. Whereas pray or worship 3 times a day, um, all the tithes, all of the stuff that's religious, like hearing the shofar and reading Megillah and waving lulav and etrog and studying Torah, all of those things are actually directed at and for the men in the community. So all of the positive mitzvot are incumbent on the men. All of the negative mitzvot are incumbent on everyone, and 3 positive mitzvot are incumbent not on men but only on women. So that's the breakdown here. So in the case that Maimonides is framing here, he's suggesting that all of these are negative mitzvot, and therefore, even though the translator chooses the gendered language of sins between man and man, it really means one person and another, because a transgression is not, you don't get out of, your obligation to the mitzvot, the negative mitzvot if you're a woman. So, you're not allowed to injure somebody or steal or curse or any of those things that are included here. Applies equally to men and women. So it says no forgiveness will attend. It says will never be forgiven. But I tried to hew a little bit closer to the Hebrew itself until one gives one's colleague what one owes him or her and appeases him or her. It's just clunky to write that way. And Maimonides is writing in the singular, so I understand the translator's desire to preserve the masculine translation. Hebrew's a gendered language, so you almost have to. Okay, so that's what we have so far. The first big block of Laws of Teshuvah, Chapter 2, Section 9, states the following. The Day of Atonement and the process of atonement only make atonement for transgressions between a person and one's God. Transgressions between one person and another cannot be rectified by just spiritually evolving oneself and or observing the Day of Atonement, right? Those two forms of covering over or mechanisms for kapara, for doing the atonement thing, don't have the ability to effectuate atonement in the case where one person has injured another. And not just physical bodily injury, but all kinds of injury. Injury to one's property, injury to one's reputation, injury to one's feelings. All right, that's actually included in here. You hurt another person, it is not enough just to say, I repent of this privately to me and God. Say, wow, when I was at shul last week and I told Arlene that I really thought her shoes didn't match her outfit, and I could see she was hurt by this. Like, that's not something I can just go to my office and say, "Wow, that wasn't so good, Blake. You'll do better next time." Like, I am obligated in such a case to say the next time I see her, or specifically to make a time to see her, say, Arlene, I might have really, just acted in a way that was rash and impulsive and doesn't reflect how I feel about you. I want to atone for what I said, right? You have to do it with the person. And that's hard work. Aaron Resco, raise your hand and you can chime in when you unmute.
I have a more comparative religion question. I mean, I find this whole concept really beautiful, and I'm wondering, my understanding of this in Christianity is very base, but I don't think it's the same, right? Like if you go to confession, you don't have to apologize. Is that correct?
I think, well, like you, I'm a Christianity novice or an enthusiast, but hardly conversant in the ins and outs of the tradition the way I am with Judaism. So too with any other world tradition. I'm a dabbler in all world traditions to the extent that I can be, but Judaism is my HQ. Um, Certainly with respect to Catholicism, like OG Christianity, yeah, the whole premise of Pauline doctrine, like the writings of Paul, who was Jesus's first and greatest exponent, and his one of the world's greatest PR managers. According to Paul, it is faith, not works, that effectuates salvation. So it is your willingness to go out on faith and say, I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and that is what actually atones for my sins. And of course, Christianity or Catholicism adds in the additional layer that sin is not just about what you do, it's actually something you carry from birth. The notion in Christianity is that we are all born sinners and that we must be redeemed. And the only way to do that is through faith, not works. Like that. Now, again, in mainline Protestantism, as it is expressed in countless churches around the world today, particularly here in the States, my experience is that that doctrine is downplayed and a doctrine of good works is actually upplayed, looking perhaps less to the Pauline doctrines about Jesus and more to how did Jesus himself live. Like the whole idea to reclaim Jesus and Jesus's character as a person who attended the poor and the sick and the vulnerable in the community. There are many Christian sects today that look more to let's be like Jesus. Like, those bracelets that say WWJD, what would Jesus do? That's not Catholic. Catholic doesn't really care. I mean to say it doesn't care, but it doesn't really care. The meaning
Yeah.
of Jesus in Catholicism is that he suffered, died, and was resurrected, and through faith in that salvation, and through the saving power of Jesus as a resurrected, Son of God, and our ability to have Jesus take away our human sinfulness, that's the route to our spiritual progress and of ultimate redemption. Whereas in Judaism, it's all about teshuvah. The only extra human mechanisms for attaining a kind of spiritual salvation are the ones that Maimonides names in the first sentence. Teshuvah itself, the process, and the Day of Atonement. So it's not like there's nothing we can do if we've gone afoul of our religion. As Alan says, we didn't keep Shabbos. All the people who come to me all the time and say, Rabbi, I'm not a good Jew. And that's usually an invitation to say, well, what do you mean by that? And what they usually mean is I'm not an observant Jew. I'm not religiously observant. But clearly Maimonides would say, well, wait a minute. The whole idea is that resides in a lesser category of what it means to be good than how you treat your fellow. Just I think the structure of this teaching itself is dispositive of that view. So I think in the main, Aaron, you raise the most valid part that I would extract from your comment is that Judaism and Christianity are concerned with very similar things about what it means to be a person and how we work through the challenges of, as a friend of mine says, it's hard to be a person, right? So it's starting with the premise that because of this thing we call the human condition, it's hard to be a person. Christianity and Judaism do take divergent paths here. But again, I wouldn't discount the fact that in modern Protestant sects, there's a similar downplaying of faith and a similar upplaying of works and how we actually treat our neighbor in the real world. And in those sects, it's usually Jesus himself who becomes the model for how we treat the other. Okay. Mom and Dad.
Well, I just wanted to also, though, agree with Erin on her formulation that to the Catholic, at least is my understanding for many years being the only Jew in an operating room with many Catholic nurses. And we
At
would,
Sacred Heart Hospital in Allen.
right, we would, occasionally get into these discussions. But the idea of making amends to the person you have offended just had no part in their theological construct. It was like if I get confession and the priest says I'm cleared and I've said my novenas and my Hail Marys, I'm good to go.
Yeah.
The
Right.
fact that I stiffed a guy for $50, I already made up for that in the confessional.
Right. And that's where Maimonides, I think, at least for us as Jews, Maimonides' differentiation between transgressions between a person and God and transgressions between one person and another is really instructive of how Judaism frames the issue. So thank you. We're gonna proceed from here. So his next line gives further color to what his previous claim is. Okay, so I'm up here where it says afal pi, which some of you know. Afal pi means even if or despite the fact that. Afal pi shehechezir lo mamon, despite the fact that he may have restored to him money or property, shehu chayav lo, that he was obligated to him, sarich liratzoto, he still needs to appease him, v'lish'ol mimenu sheyimcha lo, and ask forgiveness of him. So again, like if you steal $50, certainly it is not enough to go and confess privately. And the rabbi is not a priestly intercessor for transgression. It is true that in the actual rabbinate, as I have experienced it for 25 plus years now, people do come to me to unburden themselves from time to time and say, there's this thing that I did or that was done to me, and how do I work through that? And I can't tell you how many times Maimonides has been both a spiritual and a pragmatic guide for me in those conversations. And I would emphasize what Maimonides emphasizes, like, well, let's take the scenario, let's assess the damage, let's figure out what you owe God, but most importantly, let's figure out what you owe this other person. And Maimonides makes it clear that just restoring the the stolen property or money is insufficient. You can't just say, "Here, I give it back." Right? No, no, no. That the damage that you did to that person in theft is more than the monetary or property damage. Like you injured your relationship with that person. What else got lost, right? What will it take to restore trust? How long will this person be carrying the trauma of betrayal, depending on what you did? It's different if like somebody left their. I was talking with somebody last night who said, "Oh yeah, whenever they're like they go to like these scotch tastings, these very expensive scotch tastings, and if somebody walks away from the table and leaves behind a half a dram of $100 whiskey, he's gonna drink it." I said, "Okay, I mean, do you want to talk about the ethics of that? Like, is that no harm, no foul? The person walked away and basically said, this is unclaimed property, it's yours for the take, or it's anyone's for the taking? Or did you actually take something where by taking it, you perpetrated a harm that cannot simply be repaired by refilling the cup?" It's like, wait a minute, that wasn't yours to take. What kind of relationship do we have here, right? That's what Maimonides seems most concerned with. He says, no, 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 you have to do more to earn forgiveness. What I want to emphasize, the takeaway, I think for me, is the high bar that Judaism, through Maimonides, places on what we owe one another in order to maintain, preserve, and strengthen our relationships, which are the stuff of a meaningful life as Judaism understands it. Thoughts or questions just thus far? Okay, good. So now we return to the text. So ask him to forgive him. That's where we left off. Afilu lo hiknit et chavero. All right, so even and hiknit is a really interesting word. It means to give offense. So even if he offended his colleague, or one's friend, one's other person, a chaver, by the way, it's a great word. Chaver, you probably have heard, is the Hebrew word for a friend. Most memorably, at least for me in my lifetime, was the tearful farewell that Bill Clinton bid his dear friend Yitzhak Rabin of blessed memory after Rabin was assassinated 30 years ago this fall, which, by the way, the temple, we at WRT, will be extensively reflecting on and commemorating in November, which ties to the 30th yahrzeit. It's hard for me to believe. But in Clinton's eulogy to Rabin, through tears that he was choking back, he said, Shalom Chaver. He said, goodbye, friend. The word Chaver itself comes from a root, Chet Bet Resh, which means bound together, connected. So some of you have belonged to a synagogue group known as a Chavurah. Chavurah, it means a group, but it means more than that. It means a group of people who are bound together. Many of you remember going to Hebrew school and you had a little blue book for writing in. What's the name of your little blue book in Hebrew? Anyone remember? When I say it, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, that's what our moreh or morah called it. That's your machberet. So take out your machberet, or plural machberot. A machberet literally means a thing that's bound. So a book is always a machberet because it is bound, right? A binding. So Hebrew is such an awesome language. It just gives me endless pleasure to go down these rabbit holes and to have an audience that has no choice but to listen to me or to sign off the Zoom or to fast forward if you're watching on YouTube and say, oh, there goes Blake again with his. All right. Um, right. So this is your chaver. If you offend your chaver, that's why I don't want to translate it, right? I want to use the word chaver so you get that whole sense of it. It's a person you're bound to. It's not just a person on the street. I think that matters too. Ela bidvarim, uh, even if only with words. Tzarich lipayaso. And this is the word, the English word appease actually comes from this Hebrew word, lipayes, to appease, payes, appease. So to even if you only offended a person lightly with words, Arlene shoes, to use my example, uh, Vilifgoabo, it says sarich, which means he needs, lifayaso, to appease him, to win back his favor. Vilifgoabo, which which means you have to keep coming back to him. You have to stay in relationship. Ad sheyim chalo. They're missing a word there. There needs to be a vowel under, not a word, but a vowel. Sheyim chalo. Until the point that he is appeased. Now, this is very tricky because where does it put the balance of power in a relationship that has been damaged through one person's transgression? On the victim.
Transgressee.
The transgressee, exactly, on the victim. And I think that's important too for certain matters of today's public discourse. I think that there has been a movement, particularly in the last 10 years since hashtag Me Too, um, where the subtitle is Believe the Victim, that the victim's experience is actually centered in matters of human transgression, and that just because the transgressor says, "Hey, I'm yotze," which would be the Hebrew word, I'm free, I'm released of my obligation to this person, I've done what I need to do, I did my teshuvah, stop hawking me a chinik about it, that you're still not appeased. Now, we're going to see that there must be limits to that, right? You can't approach somebody 75 times and say, I've given you back what I took. I've done my best to reform my character. What more can I do? And if the transgressee, the victim, the one who was hurt, not the one who hurt, in this situation says, I can't forgive you, I won't forgive you, where does that leave you? Well, that's why there are 9 chapters in Laws of Teshuvah and Mishnah Torah, of which I'm sure we won't get through even a fraction of them, but we're making our way. This is great because I can just do this for years on end in Elul. Okay. Um, so let's see what Maimonides has to say. So you have to keep going back until you are whole, until the relationship is restored by way of the victim saying, "Okay, I'm appeased here." Lo ratza chavero limcholo. Oh, see, Maimonides does exactly what we want him to. Okay, so we're actually here in the English. Unfortunately, the side by side doesn't always line up, which is why I actually usually prefer to study on Safaria up down. But for you, if you're not, as familiar with the Hebrew, it's totally nice to do this. It's just a little bit tricky to track where you are. So that's where we are in the English, and that corresponds to over here in the Hebrew. So it's not exactly side by side at this point, and that's just because Hebrew is a very dense language and it takes fewer words to say more things. So, right, so we're going to be up here in the Hebrew, but English takes longer, and here we go. All right, so lo ratza chavero limcholo. What if his friend, his chaver, doesn't want to forgive him? That's the situation that's described in these Hebrew words. Lo ratza does not want the friend, or the friend does not want to forgive him. Mevilo shura shel shlosha. All right, so this is really interesting. He should bring a group of 3, bnei adam, people, meire'av, from among their friends, from among his friends, ufoge bo, to approach him, meaning the transgressee, to use Alan's word, umivakeshin mimenu. So what do you do? So what's the next step? You've transgressed. You're making your teshuvah. You approach the person you've hurt. You say, "Boy, did I blow it, and I really recognize the injury I have caused us and you and our relationship, and I want to make things right." And the chaver in this situation, the other party, the transgressee, says, "Thanks, but no thanks. I want nothing to do with you. The injury is great. The injury still wounds me, and you gave me back my money, but I can never trust you again," or whatever. So the next step Maimonides says is go get 3 of his friends to work on him, right? And say, and just keep like, this is the next step. What the heck? Do you like this? I mean, I joke sometimes that, or it's not really a joke. I'm talking about this with a bar mitzvah kid coming up this weekend. That every now and then you get a real window into the places where Jewish values and American values are out of alignment with each other. I love these moments because I don't really believe that Jewish values and American values, they have a lot of overlap, but they don't have all the overlap. So in America, we have this virtue called mind your own business. Don't really have that in Judaism. In Judaism, we have a higher value called your business is my business. If this explains some character traits of the Jewish people that you're familiar with, good, then my point is proved. Right? So your business is my business, and I think that has something to do with this. But how would you feel if you're in a situation that warrants teshuvah, right? There's been a transgression. Let's say you're the transgressee, you're the one who's been hurt. And your friend comes to you and you're still in a place where the wound is so painful that you're not ready to accept this person's teshuvah and give forgiveness. Um, and then the next thing you know, three of your friends come to you and say, Bob approached us, and I really think Bob is trying here. Can you find it in your heart to forgive him? How would that play with you in the real world? I'm very curious if Maimonides' wisdom works for us today.
I don't know how to put my hand up on the screen.
You're good, Jill. Okay, yeah, talk to us.
My father always used to have a saying that was, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still.
Mm,
So no matter how hard these friends work on this person, unless he comes to it himself, he hasn't really gotten there.
thank you so much. Love that. I'm going to need to remember that. I've never heard that one before. A man
And
convinced
convinced
against his
against his
will
will
is of
is
the
of the
same.
same opinion still.
So good. Mom and dad.
I think it would totally depend on the nature of the transgression. I mean, I backed into your car in the parking lot, and you're still pissed about it. Okay, well, you got to get over that. But I got drunk and I killed your teenage son.
Right.
That's asking a lot for somebody to get over and to forgive.
Thank you so much. Yeah, right. In the real world, no matter how elaborately Maimonides wants to give us how to do this. I mean, you look at the level of pragmatic detail with which Maimonides is outlining this. Again, this is really for a Jew to, well, how do I do this? The Torah says very little. It just says we should, it actually says that for transgressions, we should oppress our souls. We should kind of practice self-mortification, and that's the way we do it. And clearly, that's not the sum total of teshuvah. Quite the opposite. And Maimonides here wants to really make it clear to just any one of us. Here's the practical guide, but you're right. No two situations are the same, and there are categories or levels of harm and therefore increasing needs or increasing demands that are placed on the process of repair. Aaron, and then Linda, please.
I think it also depends on how the group approaches you. I mean, oftentimes when you're hurt by someone else, or at least the way I process these things is to talk to other people. And so talking to three other people may be actually helpful in my ability to forgive someone. Um, and that it depends on how they approach you.
Yeah.
But also, do we make any distinction between forgiving that person from a teshuvah standpoint and needing to accept them back into your life? Like, I can forgive you for what you did, and I still don't want to be in the same type of relationship with you that I've had before. Is there anything
Yeah,
like
surely, and we'll have opportunities to return and return again in the spirit of teshuvah to that notion. I think that's right. Like, all right, we're talking about forgive, but do we forgive and forget? Maybe we can forgive and not forget. Maybe we can forgive. Forgiveness, I believe, is a powerful tool in relationships, not because of the way in which it lets the other person, the transgressor, off the hook and frees them, but in the way in which it actually frees us the transgressee, right? To give forgiveness is actually a way for people to say, I'm tired of carrying this weight around. I want to be rid of it. And the only way in which I can do that is to forgive. Does not mean I forget, does not mean I want to be in a relationship with this person. It means that I'm no longer going to allow this wound to fester. I want to move on with my life. These are really pressing questions, and of course, we're only in chapter 2 of 9 here. So I do promise there will be many opportunities to keep thinking deeply about how this plays in the real world. Linda, Michelle, and Judy, in that order, please.
Yes, what goes through my head is my mother used to say, to err is human, to forgive is divine. And it's such a hard thing. And it's such a hard thing to do. And I don't think that's part of our Jewish culture either, to forgive. I think somehow I think like grudge holding is something we need to get over.
Well, thank you. Your mom is excellent at quoting Alexander Pope from the early 18th century. And you're right, it may be divine, but guess what? We're not God. And it's hard for us to be in that role. And I think again, this mission and this lesson, this passage, chapter 2, section 9, begins with the difference between God's forgiveness and human forgiveness. And it's one thing for God to forgive us for neglecting Shabbos. It's quite another thing for us to summon that godlike quality of forgiveness. Very, very hard in the real world to do this stuff. And really important, therefore. Okay, Michelle. Unmute.
To your direct question, how would you feel if three people? I would be embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the fact that I now publish some blog pieces that reveal history and thinking, I tend to be a very private person. I will share ideas, but not necessarily personal information or feelings. And so perhaps that's a function of growing up in American society. Although I have family members who grow up equally who are completely the opposite, right? Who will talk to anybody, and
Yeah.
friends who will tell anybody everything. And I've been shocked at some of the things people will say to complete strangers or people they just met. So I think that would have the difficulty, and I want to bring this back to, I don't know what Maimonides would say, but that might out somebody in a way that they themselves would then feel harmed.
Thank you.
Um,
Yep.
Linda's comment reminds me of one other thought, which may be a difference between individual forgiveness, being able to, as an individual, to forgive, versus as a collective Jewish people forgiveness, where we don't.
Mm-hmm.
We work very hard to remember.
Yeah, that's right. It's really powerful. And, of course, what to do about, when the transgressee happens to be your sworn enemy or your transgressor. Like, how does that fit into the teshuvah framework? Um, Thank you, Michelle. Judy.
This follows up actually with what Michelle has said. There are Israeli-Palestinian parents who talk to each other. There are books and many different publications that talk about this. There's also the book, The American Mother, about the mother of an American journalist who was kidnapped and beheaded and eventually talks to the person who was responsible. And that brings in the divine. It's beyond, almost beyond human interaction, but you see in some trials a mother saying, I forgive the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And
I mean, look at
complex. It's just not easy.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a very poignant exemplar of this exact thing going on right now with the outspoken mother of the murdered hostage, uh, Rachel Poling Goldberg.
Yeah.
Or is it Goldberg Poling? Forgive me if I don't remember the order of her names. She has, I think, actually gone public and said, has, you know, talked a lot about not so much forgiveness, but the need not to lean into vengeance. This is very much playing out in a very live and painful way that I don't think a Maimonidean text, no matter how much it's a grounding text for our own teshuvah, there are probably places beyond which this cannot be stretched, where the argument just breaks down, where the transgression is actually, like my dad said, I had a fender bender, or I rear-ended you, or I bumped your car in the parking lot is not the same as I got drunk and killed your teenage son. Um, okay, so the text may be a guide, but they can't actually encompass the actual human dimension of everything that is possible here. Nevertheless, they provide immense opportunity. I mean, look at the conversation we're having. That's what text will do for us. So let's read on just a little bit to the end of the Mishnah. Probably get to start the next one too. All right, so lo nitratza lahen. So if that person has no desire to forgive them, or to forgive him rather. So lo nitratza, if he's not appeased by these three friends who've tried to make an overture to broker a truce or broker teshuvah, mevilo shnia ushlishit, you should do it a second and a third time. You notice, by the way, from Maimonides, threes are important. And this is consistent throughout Maimonidean logic that if at first you fail, try and try again. You don't have to try a fourth time. Okay, and that's what he says next. I think that's really important. It's like, no, try again. Lo ratza minicho, if he doesn't want to forgive, V'holech lo v'zeh, okay, and he approaches him, v'zeh shelo machal hu chachote. As this is a tricky one to translate, but he says if he still doesn't want to forgive him, he should just minicho, which means leave it alone. Leave him alone. And v'holech lo v'zeh shelo machal hu hachote. So this is I'm trying to find the best way to translate. I'm actually struggling here. V'holech, I'm going to look to the translation here. Um, Where did I find it? Yes. On the contrary, the person who refuses to grant forgiveness is the one considered as the sinner. Okay. So this is, in other words, summarizing here, what Maimonides is saying, look, you try this process three times, you're still not able to appease the transgressee, leave it alone. And the one who now refuses to grant forgiveness is considered the transgressor. Or it doesn't really say that. It actually says he's off the mark. He has sinned, using a different word, which I think is intentional to describe the transgression. Previously, the word that Maimonides used was avera. Aver or avar means to transgress, literally to go over, to cross the line. Here, the word is chote, or the sinner, from chet. Chet, chet, tet, aleph is the root. So the three letters chet, tet, aleph, pronounced chet, is actually an archery term. I know we mentioned this last year, so you've heard this before. Chet literally means when you fire your arrow and miss the bullseye, miss the target entirely. You can be way off. But it's a term that means to miss the mark. And that is different from avera, which means to cross the line, right? And not just about intentionality, though I think that's a valence here. It's about, all right, one is the harm that is done when you violate another person or a precept. This is about this person is now carrying something where it's off the mark, not to grant forgiveness when authentically and sincerely approached by the transgressor who's really trying to make teshuvah, and you just say, I will not forgive. At that point, the power dynamic is inverted, and the one who is the transgressor, the original transgressor, is in some way let off the hook of at least of his obligation to appease the one he has hurt. And the one who was hurt, the transgressee, is now carrying the chet. That person's now off the mark. Jill. Oh, unmute yourself kindly. Good.
So is he saying that you are obligated to forgive at the end of 3 attempts, even if you don't feel it?
Yeah, he is.
Do you think that's right?
I think it's useful that 5 minutes ago I said in the real world, these things become much more complicated than they are on paper.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Mom, Dad.
I think this is rather brilliant, though, in context, in that it sets up a playing field, actually, with some rules about how you're going to deal with one of the most difficult parts of human interaction. When one person has offended the other or done something, how do you get past that? And, this is here's what you do. Here's the playing field. You make this approach, he makes this response, blah, blah, blah. But it's all rather brilliant in construction, my personal opinion.
Thank you. Well, I share your appreciation for Maimonides, just all the more these days because I believe that his overwhelming appeal to what is rational and logical and the way in which he synthesizes or integrates the rational and the logical framework into all matters Jewish, suggesting or actually directly proposing that there is no daylight between that which is rationally and logically compelling and that which is Jewishly compelling is a quite beautiful argument in favor of the way in which Judaism embraces empirical truth. For more on that, see me on Kol Nidre, where this will be the subject of my remarks. So I've been doing a lot of reading of Maimonides on the subject of, well, how do we, I love your word, your phrase, playing field. It sets up a playing field with rules, with logic, with reason, um, to make sense of the mess of the playing field of human interactions, which are where we toil and how we spend our days. Thank you for your appreciation. Michelle, please.
I'm not sure I expect you to be able to answer this.
Good.
So not that I don't think you'll answer.
Oh, I'll try. Yeah.
Um, so this conceptually, this whole thing derives at a very high level, I think, from the sacrificial rites around, sin and various forms of offerings from the temple, obviously replaced once there was no temple, derived over the years. I don't think those addressed the individual relationships the way this does. So I'm thinking that, Maimonides to us seems early, but I think it's also fairly far along. And I'm wondering to what extent this was revolutionary or he just did a brilliant job of pulling together what was already practiced.
That's such a great question. I think that the only way to evaluate that is going to be subjective. My own take is that it is more revolutionary than evolutionary. In that Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, and it's especially visible here, requires that one masters and can assimilate vast swaths of Jewish text and conversation in the Talmud. We've studied Talmud together, many of us, not everyone on this Zoom, but you'll have an opportunity to dive in or dive back into some Talmud after the high holidays. We start during the week of Sukkot with our Talmud stories, and you'll see that it's just written in such a different way. It is so tangled and discursive, and it relies not just on legal argumentation, but also on anecdotes and, 1,000 rabbit holes. The ability to synthesize out of that mess a cohesive, rational argument that even the least educated Jew in the pew can follow and practice, that in and of itself, Maimonides is hardly just summarizing here. Um, in a way, in an era 800 years removed, it's fascinating to make a comparison, as I now will, between Maimonides and what AI is capable of. AI is basically modern AI is all derived from the same basic process known as a large language model or LLM, where computers are trained on vast swaths of information, like not just the Talmud, but all of the human knowledge that's available on the internet. Just a lot. All the libraries of humankind are fed into these LLMs, these large language models, and then they are able to spit back synthesized arguments based on all of it. At some point, we're going to have like a workshop or a conversation about how to use AI in a constructive way. I've been dabbling over the summer and I've discovered some absolutely gobsmacking like utility for this, and also it terrifies me, but that's different. The fact that it terrifies me is immaterial. It's here to stay. And we all have to get on board. If you don't believe me, read Tom Friedman from this week, which is really amazing. And it's nice to have some writing that's not about Israel and Gaza. Um, so I think, Michelle, again, what Maimonides was doing to Talmud and Judaism is revolutionary in the same way of what AI can do with all information. And Talmud, by the way, too. It can absorb and then spit back such a cohesive document that is consistent with Jewish law, but that really, I think that, reading Mishnah Torah, what are we getting? Are we getting a mind into Judaism, or are we getting the mind of Maimonides? Well, both. But in as much as Maimonides is one of the foremost authorities on Judaism, so much of our understanding of Judaism is Maimonidean, even now 800 years later. That to me suggests more revolution than evolution. But I just, I could sit with this question
Which also,
always.
thank you, which also puts it at a much higher level and a more intellectually complex level than AI will ever do. Because I don't know, even if AI brings things together, I don't believe it can ever truly create. But that's a discussion for another day.
That is a discussion for another day. But for if you're coming away from this with a kind of awestruck appreciation for the Maimonidean project here, yeah, well, with good reason, and it reinforces the old saying, "Mi Moshe leMoshe ein kaMoshe." I'll break that down. Mi Moshe, from Moses, leMoshe, to Moses, ein, none, kaMoshe, like Moshe. So it's an old Jewish aphorism, Mi Moshe leMoshe ein kaMoshe. From one Moses to the next Moses, there was none like Moses. Who are the Moseses? Well, of course, Moses of the Torah. The second one is Moshe ben Maimon. So Maimonides had a first name. His name was Moses. He was a Moshe. Ben, son of Maimon, his father. Which is why his acronym is Rav Moshe ben Maimon Resh Mem Bet Mem Rambam. So from here on out, if you hear me refer to the Rambam, now you know I'm talking about the same guy. Maimonides just is the Greekified uh, formulation of his name. Maimonides, Ides, is the suffix that means son of. Like, like the kid I went to school with, Paul Orphanides. I went to elementary school with a kid named Paul Orphanides. Only as an adult did I realize, oh, Paul, son of the orphan. I was like, whoa, that's kind of cool. So Edes, very common Greek suffix, the same way son is in Icelandic or English, and the same way vich is in Russian. Okay, let's go on and complete this text. We won't go into the next one, and that is fine. All right, so I went back and just took another look to try and figure out why I was bungling the translation, and that's because it's actually really confusing Hebrew for me. But just to recap here, lo nitratza lahen. So if he's not appeased by them, mevi lo shniya shlishit. We got that. Then they should reapproach a second and even a third time. Lo ratza. There should be a comma after the word ratza. That's what was throwing me. If he still isn't appeased, ratza literally means to desire or want, but can also be translated in the passive. So lo ratza, if he is not appeased, minicho, we leave him be, meaning the transgressee. Volechlo, v'zeh shehu, and kind of like he goes on his own, v'zeh shelo machal, the one who will not forgive, hu hachote. He's now off the mark. That's my translation. Here it says, he is the sinner. Okay, as translated here, on the contrary, the person who refuses to grant forgiveness is the one considered the sinner. It's a totally good idiomatic translation. I was just struggling to get it out of the Hebrew. V'im haya rabo, there's a clause at the end which changes everything. V'im haya rabo, but if he was his teacher, holech, he goes to him, uva, and comes back, afilu elef pe'amim, even 1,000 times, ad sheyimcha lo, until he is appeased. Okay, so let's break that down. So there's a coda at the end. It's sort of a surprise twist at the end. We've established all of the mechanisms for appeasing the transgressee as the transgressor on whom it is incumbent to make teshuvah. The process requires going to, first of all, it requires restitution if property or money was taken or anything else was taken. If what was taken was trust or love or fidelity or faithful, friendship, well, those are harder qualities to restore. But there's restitution, but there's also trying to appease your fellow by asking for his or her forgiveness. If granted, then we move on. If not granted, get three buddies to inveigh upon the transgressee. Do that a second time and a third time. If still not forgiven, leave it alone. That person wants not to give forgiveness. And that person now, I would say not so much that he's a sinner. I would just say balls in his court. Balls in the court now of the transgressee, because there's nothing more that the one who has perpetrated the harm can reasonably do. But things change under the following condition. What if he is, it says, if he is his teacher? Now, I had to just kind of like try to figure out who's the teacher here. To me, pretty clearly, the transgressee is the teacher. The transgressor is the student. So in the student-teacher relationship, and it's not just any teacher, the word for teacher here is rav, not moreh, right? A moreh is a teacher, but a rav is one's rabbi. So if you give offense to your rabbi, 3 times won't cut it. So what do we learn from this? I mean, let's use our last 5 minutes to talk about why there's a separate category for the rabbi-student relationship. And do we really believe it, or is this literary hyperbole for the sake of making a larger point that Maimonides wants to make? I'm leading the witnesses here, but tell me what you think. What does it tell us about what matters in the world of Maimonides? Yeah. Anyone?
The rabbi is held in a high place of honor. When he enters the room, you stand. You have to go the extra mile for the forgiveness.
I think that's really a very astute way of understanding this, that this is, and perhaps it gives us a window into the the specific quality of honor known as kavod arav. Like every human being is owed kavod or honor because he or she is a human being made in the image of God. But if you studied with me, and many of you did, the book Pirkei Avot, the wisdom of the ancestors, the chapters of the fathers, or just wise sayings of the rabbis, which is really a guidebook for how to be a rabbi. That book is all about the rabbi-student relationship. And it does reside in its own category of kavod. So we have a specific kind of kavod known as kavod arav, which is that, no, the rabbi-student relationship is Kodesh HaKodashim. It is one of the most profound and sacred of all relationships. What's striking to me is that it's not, for instance, the parent-child relationship. that requires a thousandfold approach in the case of harm that has been perpetrated. There's a sense that we won't tolerate, like, what's the name of the book? Too Big to Fail, right? The rabbi-student relationship is too important to be compromised by a transgression. And I think it does speak also to the complex dynamics between rabbis and their students, particularly since what are rabbis and students doing? Well, they're arguing with each other, right? That's actually the stuff of the rabbi-student relationship. It's all about argument. And in that, if that's the playing field, the risk of causing offense is a thousandfold greater, right? If all you're doing all day long from sunup, you daven shacharit, you go to the yeshiva, and you're in the Bes Midrash with your Rav, all you're doing all day long is arguing with the Rav, well, the likelihood that this primary relationship in a yeshiva bocher's life could be injured by, again, the word is transgression, going over the line. I've had, yeshiva bochers, my students, they've gone a little too far. I can't remember if I was ever, yeah, no, I remember once I was so angry. This was when I was an angry young man. I was, probably 3 years into my time at WRT, so I'm all of 32 years old. And I just had a group of unruly teenagers, and I was tired of, shushing them week in, week out. And then finally, I didn't lose my cool. I just left the room. Um, I don't know if I'd ever do it again, but I basically just said 20 minutes into a class after trying many times to get the group to follow my lead, just talk about anything. Like it didn't even have to be the lesson plan. Like could we just have but they were full of beans, teenage kids. And I was twice their age, but that's not a lot when you're 32. I was a kid myself, and I'm like, that's it, I'm leaving. I just went to my office. And they sent a student representative about 20 minutes later. They hadn't disbanded to come to my office to say, we're really sorry. Will you please come back? And I said, not tonight. I'll see you next Wednesday. And by the way, the rest of the year was awesome. So, and I did come back, but I wonder what if I hadn't come back? Like, how many times would my students have had to appease me to earn my forgiveness? Again, I'm not sure I do that these days. I also, by the way, per George's nice comment, now that I'm an old rabbi, when I walk into the room, kids kind of just like treat me like the old rabbi. Now the people who have headaches are my assistant colleagues. They walk into the room and they have unruly teenagers, and they it's not the same. Like it's sort of like, oh, the rabbi who named me and who did my bar mitzvah and who married my parents. Okay, I guess I have to be respectful around him. In some ways, that's a beautiful thing, and in other ways, I kind of miss the intimacy of like just talking to kids about their real lives without them uh, kind of putting up a couple walls around me, walls that are derived from respect, I'm sure, but that don't allow me to get to know them as well as I used to. Does this make sense to you? I don't know. For me, I think a lot about the rabbi-student relationship, and I'm thinking mostly about kids. I'm not really thinking about you in this room here. I can't really imagine anything that anyone in this room would do that would cause such offense that you'd have to approach me 999 times before I finally relent. And rabbis already carry themselves with enough authority that I don't love the fact that this text seems to reinforce rabbinic authority. I kind of like taking myself down off the pedestal of Kavod HaRav and just showing people that, well, I'm a real person too. I don't know. What are your thoughts? And then we'll wrap up for today. Judy.
One thing that strikes me from the beginning is how both a rabbi and a teacher have to learn from their students. And I know you've said this many times, and I think part of the
Have you as a teacher?
of the Rav is listening to the students. And in the end, if the Rav has listened, if the teacher has listened to the students and has not heard what their issue is, then the Rav is at fault. That I really think there's some responsibility in understanding the student and the perpetrator. after so many times of asking forgiveness, that's a big deal. And it's humiliating if you are the person who's asking and trying so hard. And if you're doing it over and over and over again,
Yeah.
that's an incumbent on the Rav to say, give anyway, there's a responsibility going both ways.
I feel that deeply, which is why like I'm willing to be kind of open around my discomfort with this surprise ending. Mom and Dad.
I'm almost thinking that Maimonides has a little tongue in cheek on this, as if he's saying, look, I'm the Rav here. All of my students really respect me. I think in general, those who are given the title of Rav are not unreasonable people, and they're going to get along with even the people who offend them. So, it's kind of like, oh, but if you offend me, well, you just better come back 1,000 times. I think there's something to be said for Maimonides knows that this is kind of like well, I'll say tongue in cheek, maybe a little. Maybe that's never been said before about Maimonides, but that's the way this strikes me.
I love that. Thank you, Aaron.
I may be thinking about it backwards, but I think it also acknowledges that anyone in a position of authority, parents, teachers, rabbis, doctors, for example, we are human too, and we make mistakes and we get angry. And I appreciate that acknowledgement because I think a lot of times people don't see that part of us, right? Like they see, oh, well, you're a rabbi, you're not allowed to get angry, you're not allowed to get offended, but you're human too. And I think that this acknowledges that.
Lovely. And on that note, my dad says, "Can you remind people?" Yes, I can remind people to listen to Leonard Cohen's "Who by Fire" before the holidays. I've put a link to where you can hear the great bard of Montreal and one of the great Jewish teachers of our lifetimes, Leonard Cohen, uh, to whose fair city a number of us made pilgrimage in June and had a lovely trip. Who by Fire is Cohen's brilliant and stirring and scary play on Unatana Tokef. So it's great high holiday food for the soul. I've given a link to the YouTube where you can listen. And in the meantime, we reconvene next week where we will pick up directly where we left off, which according to me is chapter 2, section 10. And it's so even as today we touched a little bit on one of my themes for the high holidays, which is the pursuit of empirical truth. The next passage is going to take up another theme that I'm going to explore in long form on the morning of Yom Kippur, which is what place does cruelty have in the Jewish tradition? So it's Maimonides has been by my side for many, many weeks now as I've begun my writing. So in the meantime, if you're coming to the Caring Community Luncheon, I look forward to seeing you shortly after noon today. And please do join us, I hope in person, or if not able to, please join us remotely by live stream on the temple's website or associated social media, Facebook and YouTube, for a beautiful service of installation of Rabbi Platkow this Friday night. We'll be joined by our guest scholar in residence for the Morgan of Blessed Memory and Margie Miller Scholar in Residence Weekend, Rabbi Rolando Roli Matalon, an incredible Jewish leader who has now announced his retirement in June as the senior rabbi for a generation at B'nai Jeshurun, BJ, in New York City, who was Rabbi Platkow's fieldwork mentor and one of the great rabbis of our time, an incredible musician, spiritual guide, scholar, teacher, and social activist. You won't want to miss this wonderful weekend. Rolly is going to be our featured speaker of installation remarks on Friday night. You'll also hear from Rabbi Platkow, special music. It's going to be a really nice night. Saturday morning, we have a community Shabbat service featuring Rabbi Matalon. That will be held at 9:30 and will follow with study and discussion with Rolly, Rabbi Matalon, as well as some nice nosh. And it's just going to be a beautiful Shabbat together, and I can't wait to see you here. So Shabbat Shalom in advance, and see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, John.
Thanks so much, John.
Thanks, Judy.
Another great,
Take care.
have a great class.
Thank you.